All rise. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. The Court of Appeals for the 4th Judicial Appellate District is now open pursuant to call.
Good afternoon. Please be seated. Thank you, everyone, in attendance here at the 4th Court of Appeals here in San Antonio. I welcome the family and other members of the legal community who are present today to celebrate the life of Lucien Benton Campbell. We also say greetings to the audience, our virtual audience. The 4th Court has some bragging rights. We are the first court to not only have hybrid oral argument post-COVID or during COVID, in fact, we've also been able to transition and provide for a larger audience on what I've never thought I would ever say, that we have a YouTube channel. And so we have a greater audience of family and friends on YouTube now as we live stream this court memorial. As many of you know, the court has celebrated this tradition, which began under the auspices of then Chief Justice Cadena, whose namesake it is this Justice Center, along with Justice Reeves. And he began the tradition of celebrating the life of a member of the San Antonio Bar Association, an organization that joins the court in celebrating. And so I welcome Donna, our president of the San Antonio Bar. At this time, I'd like to introduce the members of the court. To my far right is Justice Lori Valenzuela. To my immediate right is Justice Beth Watkins. To my immediate left is Justice Lisa Rodriguez. And on their behalf, I send the regrets of Justices Chapa, Justice Lucien Chapa, Irene Rios, and Patricia Alves, who with regrets are unable to be present today. I'd also like to introduce at this time the family of Mr. Campbell. Those include his wife, Cynthia Campbell, his son, Evan Campbell, and wife, Kim. Welcome. Grandchildren, Emmeline and Benton Campbell. Brother Bill Campbell and his wife Janice, sister Kay Lovac, Kelly Shivers, and regrettably Vicky Campbell is unable to be here, but certainly intended to be. We wish her well. I'd also like to recognize my friend and colleagues, Judges Ed Prado and Judge Henry Bemperad, who join us here today, and we look forward to your remarks today. At this time, if I may, invite our first speaker, David Chapman. If that's the order, unless there's a separate order, I'm happy to, okay.
Cool.
Of course.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. I was working on a post-conviction matter in Nashville, Tennessee, quite a few years ago. And I didn't know whether I was up to my neck in hot water or up to my waist in the big muddy, as we used to say. And so I called Lucien, and to try to get a little guidance, he says, David, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Well, the phone rang, and I looked at my clock, and it was 3 minutes. And it wasn't Lucien, it was the federal public defender for the Eastern District of Tennessee. See, I was expecting this male voice I knew very well, and this woman introduced herself. And she gave me a lot of good guidance about a lot of people and a lot of things over there. It was a nice signification, not only of our friendship, which was the secondary thing, but of the esteem he was held all over the system in the federal courts and in federal public defender's offices. I remember being an assistant district attorney in Fort Worth appellate section. He called me up and asked me to read a Supreme Court submission. I can't remember if it was a petition or a brief. And I melted a little bit and I thought, that's a pretty good compliment. Some background, he grew up he spent summers in Paris where his grandparents lived. He worked on the ranch, and in college he worked in his grandfather's law office. He was in the Army, basic training, officer candidate school, and I swear he told me that he was about to go into Ranger training when he got called up to go into JAG, and he thought, with that choice for the rest of his life, the JAG was probably the best place to go. He came here after JAG and went into the DA's office like all of us. He started in the misdemeanor complaint section and then went to misdemeanor trial court. And then he went, with many people did not, most people did not, he went to the appeal section. Well, later, a couple of years later, I was in the appeal section with Doug Young, mutual friend of ours. And one day I made a mistake when I was visiting over there with him and with Cynthia and with Evan and the grandkids. And I said, Lucien, I remember when we were in the appeal section, Doug and I, and Doug may have been there, I don't know. I said, in those days, and everything in those days was appeals straight to the Court of Criminal Appeals. I said, it was just two of us doing all the appeals, all the writs, and all the 1983 civil rights suits out of the jail, just two of us for a county of 1 million people. And there came this bellow out of his chair, and he said, when I was there, I did it all by myself. and then there was that little smile, little chuckle, and he knew that he'd had a little something on me. He went from the appeal section to third chair felony and then first chair felony. And at some point, late in 74 or early 75, the chief judge of the federal district court here, the Western District of Texas, personally invited him to apply for the job of a public defender. He wasn't even thinking about it. And so he applied and got the job. He asked for recommendations. I had worked on the Court of Criminal Appeals, so he knew I knew the judges, and he later expressed pure astonishment at the fact that those judges recommended him and had such wonderful things to say about him. So it was a measure of what kind of person he was, that he was stunned by that they would remember that he'd been a great appellate lawyer. He's created the Federal Public Defender's Office, and it became, what can you call it? I sometimes say when I'm building up a legal paper, I go to a go-by. It became the go-by Public Defender's Office for the entire country. He started the Public Defender's Office with a tiny group of people, including Ed Prothel, and it built to where it's now 150 employees district-wide. And of course, I've told you about the public defender in the Eastern District, Tennessee. And when I was preparing this, I thought of a quote by John W. Gardner. And he said, the life of reflection is not superior to the life of action. They are both essential to a vital society. And Gardner, from his journals, you can tell he fought as to which way he wanted to go. And like Lucien, and Lucien was, as I've just expressed, I hope, was someone who was able to manage and do both of those constantly almost. Trial lawyer, creator of an office that great, and arguing and leading the argument in the U.S. Supreme Court. 3 big victories in less than a decade. And then after he retired, he started doing things. He taught himself to sketch. He taught himself to play the guitar. I was lucky. I talked him into letting me see the sketches, some of them, and to let me listen to him play the guitar. And he was pretty damn good, if you'll forgive the expression. And so there's only one thing I have to complain about with Lucien. Lucien and I used to exchange emails. We both had this problem that we liked, that we thought the English language was not just a tool, but a toy. And there's somebody here who has that same inclination. And so at any rate, we exchanged emails, but I was at a disadvantage. He could pun in 3 languages fluently. So we did that. And there were, but that is part of what I want to say next. He inadvertently deceived me. He had such a good ear for the language and an incredible ear for music. With me, it was classical, which I knew very poorly compared to him, and jazz, which I'd had comparable experiences, but he could listen to a piano player, classical or jazz, and tell you who it was. And I was nowhere near that good, nor am I now. So I thought, well, it must be that if you have a good ear for music and a good ear for language, it's natural, but it isn't. That was just Lucien had that good an ear for both. And finally, as everybody knows who's ever argued before an appellate court, you don't read your arguments. And obviously I didn't read what I was saying here, but I want to go back to John W. Gardner and read this. He got a letter from a man in Colorado whose 20-year-old daughter had just been killed in a car wreck. And he wrote Mr. Gardner and said, this was in her wallet, and it helped me understand her better, and I'm glad it did. Meaning is not something you stumble across, like the answer to a riddle or the prize in a treasure hunt. Meaning is something you build into your life. You build it out of your own past, out of your affections and loyalties, out of the experience of humankind as it is passed on to you, out of your own talent and understanding, out of the things you believe in, out of the things and people you love, out of the values for which you are willing to sacrifice something. The ingredients are there. You are the only one who can put them together into that unique pattern that will be your life. Let it be a life that has dignity and meaning for you. If it does, then the particular balance of success or failure is of less account. I have trouble thinking about any failures that Lucien had, and his life certainly had dignity and meaning beyond counting. I can't remember where I heard or read this, but I have to say it. He was one of the wisest of men and one of the gentlest of men. Who can replace him in either, let alone in both?
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. If I may invite the Honorable Ed Prado up to the podium. Never thought I'd do this today. But invite the Honorable Ed.
I could tell stories on these people up here, but
We're not going to do that, right, Judge Prado?
no, they have to run for re-election, so I better watch what I. Just to set the record straight, when David said that Lucien spent his summers in Paris, it was not Paris, France, but Paris, Texas. Lucien B. Campbell was my boss, my teacher, my mentor, and my dear friend. I've known Lucien perhaps more than a lot of people here. Gordon Armstrong and David and I were in the DA's office with Lucien back before he was appointed the federal public defender. Even back then, as a prosecutor in the Bexar County District Attorney's Office, Lucien had a reputation for being one of the top prosecutors in the office, and everyone went to Lucien for help and assistance whenever they had some issues in some of the cases that they had before the courts of Bexar County. I was lucky enough to work my way up in the DA's office and get promoted to be a third chair prosecutor in front of the 175th District Court. Preston Dial was the judge at the time, and Lucien was the first chair prosecutor. And I learned so much starting off my felony prosecution time with Lucien that serves me to this day. Things like the importance of being thoroughly prepared, how to organize your case, how to prepare your witnesses, and how to make a presentation, whether it be before a jury or before the court. Lucien had a work ethic like no one else I have ever known. He was the ultimate professional and the most ethical attorney I have ever known. He was one of the most brilliant minds to ever walk the halls of this courthouse. I think one of the smartest things that Lucien did while he was in the prosecution, a prosecutor in the DA's office, was to ask the first assistant district attorney's secretary if she would marry him. For some reason, Cynthia said yes. As it happened, Lucien and Cynthia were married 1 week after I was married with Maria. And I happen to know, as a result, that this November will make their 50th wedding anniversary. And it'll also be Lucien's birthday, because you were married on Lucien's birthday. By some miracle, I convinced him to take me with him to the public defender's office to start the office. There were some skeptics who weren't sure that a top-notch prosecutor who was so tough could become a public defender. Well, Lucien proved them wrong. His appointment was one of the wisest things that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has ever done, to appoint Lucien to run the office. Lucien turned from being a top-notch prosecutor to being one of the leading federal public defenders in the country. He turned it into a powerhouse of advocacy for indigent criminal defendants. My education under El Jefe, which we all called him, continued when I was in the public defender's office. I improved my writing skills significantly with Lucien's ability to do appeals. Not only were we doing trial work, but we were also doing appeals. And it helped me tremendously, and it improved my writing skills that helped me quite a bit when I became an appellate judge. I remember the first draft of a brief that I wrote for Lucien as we were appealing a case. And I thought I'd done a pretty decent job of putting a brief together. So I took it to his office and said, Lucien, look it over and see what you think. This is what I'll come up with. About 15, 20 minutes later, I hear, Ed, come into my office. I walk in there. There was more red ink on that paper than I'd ever seen in my life. So I had to make some significant improvements and changes to that brief. But I learned quite a bit about how important it is to be a good writer and how to argue before an appellate court, thanks to Lucien. He was a master of the federal rules of procedure, the federal rules of evidence. He had excellent instincts on trial tactics, on how to approach certain issues. And he quickly gained a national reputation for his leadership in running one of the best public defender's office in the country. And so much so that Washington picked Lucien to be the interim public defender for the District of Puerto Rico. All this while he was still running the public defender's office here in San Antonio with a branch in El Paso. So Lucien was flying off to Puerto Rico, organizing that office, and still running our office. The office would get calls from all over the country, people calling for advice. Can I talk to Mr. Campbell? And be public defenders from everywhere who had particularly thorny issues and didn't know where to turn, whether it be an ethical issue or trial tactics or whatever. They would call our office, and Lucien would spend half his time, I shouldn't say half his time, but a significant part of his time giving advice to public defenders throughout the country. As you will hear later from Henry, and David mentioned it, his office argued several cases before the Supreme Court that established some significant case law that is still with us to this day. He was a quiet leader. He was a modest man. He didn't go around tooting his horn about all his accomplishments. You wouldn't read about him in the newspaper very often. Rarely did you see his name in the paper. Yet his reputation for being an excellent criminal defense lawyer was known throughout the country. He managed one of the best offices there was, and would also give advice to others as to how to run their office. While widely not known in the outside the legal community, he was well known within the legal community, and the criminal defense bar here in San Antonio knew him well and were well aware of his success and his accomplishments. His influence over me continued as I moved on in my career. I learned how to be an effective leader, how to be an ultimate professional in dealing with people, and how to treat people with respect. My admiration for Lucien followed me to the federal bench. Once when he was making an appearance before me, Lucien had a motion to suppress. I forgot what it was, some sort of hearing before me. And I'm sitting there in my robe, and Lucien gets up and makes an objection to a question asked by the prosecutor. I said, overruled. I got this look that I used to get whenever I screwed up in the public defender's office. Evan's well aware of those looks, I'm sure. For a split second, I forgot that I was a judge. I almost reversed myself and apologized. Away from the office, Lucien was amazing in all his interests. You heard a little bit from David, but he was an expert on coffee, beer, wine. He could tell you all about different coffees, all about different wines, beers. He could taste it and tell you where it was from and who made the wine or the drink. It was just amazing. He knew classical music. He knew jazz. He knew all the different languages that he did. I was hired because I tricked him into thinking that I was a Spanish speaker, and I would represent all the indigent defendants who didn't speak Spanish. Little did I know that Lucien taught me Spanish while I was there and corrected all my Southwest Tech San Antonio Spanish to the correct, proper Spanish word. And it helped me quite a bit in Argentina, let me tell you. So Lucien was also my Spanish teacher. But after he was retired, I'd still get emails from him, and we'd exchange emails while I'm in Argentina. And it was great to tell him what an adventure I was having as ambassador. And he'd write me and he'd say, I just tried this wonderful Argentine Malbec wine that you really have to go and try to find this wine. I'm sure you get it a lot cheaper there. And if you can visit the winery, it'd be great. And by the way, there's this great opera at the Cologne there. And also there's a polo match. And if you have time, go see this opera and go to this polo match. I mean, Lucien was more aware of what was going on in Argentina than I was. It was just amazing. Some people who didn't know him saw him as a very serious man with a little sense of humor. But those of us who knew him knew that Lucien loved to tell stories and tell jokes. And it was just such a joy to just sit and listen to Lucien tell stories and tell jokes. And his big laugh was just such a joy just to sit and listen to Lucien. His influence in the courts of Bexar County, in the courts of the state of Texas, and throughout the nation will live on through all the attorneys that he has trained and who have learned as his feet. Lucien lives on through all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
You don't want me to tell stories on you?
We still have contempt power.
Her parents 2 days ago, and I remember you coming to 8th grade when you were in the 8th grade to my courtroom, and I promised I wouldn't tell those stories. So.
Thank you, and invite Judge Pembroke. Welcome, Judge.
Thank you, Justice Martinez. Your Honor, may it please the court. I'm so happy to get a chance to speak about Lucien again. I want to try to confine my remarks to legal matters, but it's very difficult to confine my remarks. He was the most important person in my legal life, but he's one of the most important mentors I had in all my life, along with Judge Prado, my father. He means that much to me, and I think to everyone who's here. But I really did want to talk a little bit about, just really focus on some of the legal matters, particularly the Supreme Court cases that David mentioned. Most local firms here in San Antonio think it's the pinnacle of their career to have a case in front of the Supreme Court. A local criminal defense firm would certainly think that was true. How about winning a case in the Supreme Court? That's even a greater accomplishment. But how about winning 3 in a row? And that's what Lucien did. No one else at the time that I know of in the public defender service or anywhere else in the criminal defense service had that kind of record in that kind of career in the Supreme Court. Now, some may say, look, he was the head of the office and he was managing these things, but he was deeply involved. And most importantly, in the first case, the Huey case that I know Nancy was there for, he handled that case himself from the beginning through the Fifth Circuit, where he lost. He convinced the Supreme Court to grant certiorari, convincing them there was a split in the circuit when probably there wasn't a split in the circuit at the time. And he obtained a unanimous decision reversing the Fifth Circuit. It was an astounding accomplishment on his part. His other cases are of great import. People will remember the Bond case argued by Carolyn Fuentes, again, with Lucien there at counsel table. I was privileged to be there as well. That's the case about squeezing a bag, and that squeezing a bag would be a search. And not just criminal defense lawyers, but pretty much every lawyer in the nation who's been to law school since 1995 knows the Lopez case, the case that reestablished the Commerce Clause as a basis for challenges to federal legislation. That was Lucien's case. Jack Carter argued it, but Lucien was essential to that determination. I will tell you that I remember preparing for it the night before. Lucien, as he would probably be mad at me right now for speaking extemporaneously. He'd like you to be a little bit more prepared than I am right now. But he asked Jack Carter, he says, look, I want to see what your opening sentence is going to be. You don't have to tell me your whole argument, but I need to hear what is your opening sentence to the Supreme Court. And so Jack Carter, with some reluctance, wrote the sentence out. Lucien looked at the sentence and he said, there, that word, that's where you're getting your first question. You better be prepared. He was exactly right. Jack Carter got to that word. Justice O'Connor interrupted him and says, what do you mean by that? Lucien knew exactly what was going to happen in that case. The Judge Prado mentioned, Ambassador Prado mentioned, the tremendous amount of preparation that he did, but he also was he was quick-witted and could think on his feet in very difficult situations. I saw him in argument a number of times in the Fifth Circuit, also in moot court for numerous Supreme Court cases, where he would really hone right in on the issues that people needed to address. So this was not just for San Antonio, not just for the Fifth Circuit, but throughout the country. So many lawyers, both the public defenders, but also defense lawyers would come to him and ask him questions because he had a legal mind really in the federal system like no other. It was just astounding. And I was so lucky to benefit from all the things that he taught me as a lawyer and taught me as a person. Two other stories I want to tell briefly. One is I remember his last oral argument before the Fifth Circuit. It was before then Chief Judge Henry Politz. And he gets up to argue this case. I was arguing the case after his. And it was a sentencing challenge. And Judge Politz says, Mr. Campbell, how many years? And so he said, well, Your Honor, my client got 15 years in prison. No. How many years have you been our public defender in the Western District of Texas? And at that time, it had been 24. He says, well, I'm coming up on 25 years. He says, well, you better stay because we absolutely need you. And this is a circuit that didn't really love public defenders so much, but they appreciated the tremendous abilities that Lucien had. The other story I wanted to tell is one just like Judge Prado's. I remember my first brief I was working on for Lucien as well. And I remember he was not quite as casual with me as he was with you, Judge. He said, Henry, accompany me to the library. And maybe some other people had this experience. And they sat down and there was my brief and there was an open case book. And he said, Henry, You cited this case for this proposition. Where in that case is that proposition? And then he just stood there, sat there and didn't move, didn't bat an eyelid, just stared at me. I can't tell you, it was the most horrible experience of my life. As I'm flipping through this case, I can't find where the case says it. I don't even know what the words say. It scared me to death. Taught me a lesson about integrity and candor with the court and knowing how to cite a case and knowing how to make an argument. It was the first lesson I learned from him, but there were so many, and I'm just so grateful to have had him in my life. I will say I'm not the only one, everyone here, but the community here in San Antonio, not just the defense community, but the legal community and the legal community throughout this circuit and the legal community throughout this country, and the cause of justice was better because we had Lucien to lead us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. With regret, Judge Vernon Clervy was unable to attend, but in his place, I'll invite Nancy Barhan to speak.
Please, Lord.
It does, thank you.
I'm just so relieved to be here today with everyone I know and people I know who love Lucien as much as I loved him and have so many stories to tell about him and what a unique individual he was. I'm greatly relieved that Judge Prado and Judge Bimperad came in front of me. So, you know, they and David, because they can all flesh out things that I thought I was going to have to touch on and would be poorly able to. I first met Lucien in 1984, and I had just moved here from Kansas City, Missouri. And Lucien had a bench, he had a position open. And I had looked at it and he said, we need a Spanish speaker. And I wasn't a Spanish speaker, but when I went over to take the Texas bar, it was still posted. So I thought, well, I'm just going to apply. And so he gave me an interview. And I gather it did not go that well, but he was desperate for someone to fill the seat of Judge Prado, who had gone on to the federal bench. And I didn't speak Spanish, so he took me on a probationary period. And our first week, I would say, did not get off to a great start. And I think we shared the same thoughts with each other, though we didn't express them. It's like, is this the worst decision of my life? Why am I here? What have I done? And, mine was sort of informed by the picture he had right outside of his office, which was signed by the district attorney, Ted Butler. And it said, to a great prosecutor. And so my thoughts were, what am I getting into? And then I went in and met him, and I will tell you, I had never been around a big Texan before with a big Texas accent, And so, he took me on a probationary period only because he could find no one else. And so I would say the first week went poorly. But the second week, we sort of took the tentative steps of trying to sort of check each other out. And I would describe it sort of cat circling, we're just trying to get the lay of the land and see if we're just going to be able to do this. And so then he started giving me sort of a series of tests, to see if I could handle what he could dish out. And so he handed me a piece of paper, which was a criminal complaint. He says, now go to your office, which was Judge Prado's office. And he says, tell me what motions you would file. And so, I tremblingly went back in with my results. And he says, well, you missed 2 of them, And so slowly, we worked our way into having, a very, very good relationship. And, I was a person who really liked to get into the mix. And so, I don't know if this would happen to you guys, but I was assigned the military base cases. And so, my first experiences were like trying, theft of 25 cents from the base gas station and, injury to a tree on public lands, But, it did prepare you, to sort of get your skills up so you could do something else. And so I only worked for Lucien, for a year and a half. I did go to the Supreme Court with him when he argued the Huey case. And it was, a big thrill. And I will tell you that when I got there, I was sworn into the Supreme Court bar by the Supreme Court. And that was a big thrill. And if Lucien were alive, I could tell him that Mr. Huey is still on the ground and he is once again in custody. So, and once again, calling me. But I'm of an age now where I have to let that go. But anyway, I worked for him for a year and a half, but we had a friendship for 30 years. And we had a friendship in a variety of ways. I sought his advice all the time. I would often get my tail in a crack, and I would talk to him about it. And since he'd never gotten his tail in a crack, he didn't really know what to tell me. But, I will say he was, and no one said this, he was a genius. He could do anything. Y'all have talked about he taught himself French, he would just teach himself. He taught himself how to program a computer. He taught himself, to do so many things, and I'm just thinking, what is this? But it was always so quiet, always on the down low. You never knew that he was doing it, but then he would just come up with this. And so over the years, I spent time with him. I spent time with Cynthia, Evan, the family, and he would just sort of occasionally leak out all these things he could do or he would know. And so, I learned, that he had a ham radio operator's license. And we went online and he still had his license. I learned that he had a private pilot license. And, I know, Judge Prado, you had the privilege of flying over West Texas on a windy day with him, and he could ride a horse, which to me, from a city girl from the Midwest, was kind of a big deal, but, one of the most fun things, and I just wanted, before I get that, I just want to say, what stands out in my mind is just how proud he was of all the people who worked for him. And it took such great pride, in all of the accomplishments of Judge Prado, and such great pride in Henry, all his accomplishments. And Carolyn's not here, Carolyn Fuentes, she did the bond case. She was the only Hispanic woman to argue 2 cases in front of the Supreme Court. And he was so proud of her, and everyone he knew, Wallace, his friendship goes back with Wallace Ferguson. They were roommates in college, they had their own secret language, and they had their own inside jokes, and he was best man at Cynthia's wedding, and his friendships went back long, deep, and far. David Chapman, they were in, the Bexar County DAs together. And so, of all his accomplishments, of all the things he knew, it seems to me the thing that he was the very best at was friendship. And friendships with all kinds of people, large and small, big people, important people, people who weren't so important, and he had the ability to look at you, unfortunately, to size us all up, he would recognize our many flaws, but he forgave them all, he forgave us for all the things where we were deficient or worthless or embarrassing. And so I'm just going to sort of finish this off with what did we do for 30 years? Well, one of the things we did is we played bridge together. And Wallace was Lucien's partner, and my partner in crime was Clark Adams, who did not appear today. And sometimes David would fill in. And we had a roaringly good time all the time. And we went over, Cynthia just opened her house. Evan welcomed us with open arms, the best hosts in the world. Flowers were always on the table, a good spread always laid out, and she would listen to us with all our idiot wisecracks and stories, just laughing ourselves sick. And we did that for 30 years. Eventually we got bridge shirts, and so Wallace and Lucien were the screaming aces because they beat me and Clark every time. And Clark and I were the fighting deuces, and I was the weakest link. But we did have a lot of fun. Nobody, yelled at me or embarrassed me or anything like that. And so, we just had so many warm, fun, friendly, good times together, apart from any of the lawyer stuff. And I was talking to Henry about this before this started, but he texted us all. I'm sure he did with you, Wallace, and you, David. I know you were the word man. And, we just text all the time, texting. So, to say that it was a loss to lose him just really, understates it, because he meant, really so much to all of us, and to say that we loved him would also be an understatement. To say that we missed him would be an understatement. And I've said to Cynthia, and I'll say it now, I cursed you, Lucien, for dying, because I would say, oh, I've got to text Lucien right now. And I couldn't, and so, all of his accomplishments, all of the esteem he was held, everybody felt that way. But, all of us here, I think what we got more than anything was to share that friendship, was to be able to share a mutual sense of respect and love, and I think we will carry that forward for the rest of our lives. And so I want to thank the Campbell family for asking me to speak, because I rarely get asked to speak in any public forum for reasons I won't go into. But I will say, Cynthia, hopefully you can exhale now. But this is an honor for me. I cannot tell you how much I appreciated Lucien in every aspect of his life. And I'm so glad we could all be here together today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've also been apprised in the last few minutes that we have left before we share the San Antonio Bar's resolution. I was informed that there were two other individuals that wanted to speak, Gordon and Linda Armstrong. Is that accurate? Very good. Just be mindful that the court has only a few minutes to do the remaining two witnesses, two speakers. Sorry. It does.
I've heard everything talked about Lucien and those back days in 1980. So you've got a relic up here. I first came across Lucien back in May of 1967. I did not know him. My wife there, my family, we were on our way to Austin, Texas. We had just been through the graduation of the law school, the passing of the bar, and now we were going to the big shindig, and that was to get sworn in as lawyers in Austin. Upon arrival there, I didn't know Austin. I did not know Lucien. He did not know me, but we sat there and they swore us in. We put up our right hand, took the oath, went over there, and Lucien and I think we were the first ones that made it over to pay the state bar of Texas membership fee and to get our license and start on our career. I did not see him after that for a while because he had joined the Army, became an officer, and was off on duty. I think he even went to a foreign country. My job was the very first job I had as a lawyer. I got hired by a man by the name of James Barlow, who was a criminal district attorney of Bexar County, and he gave me a job. Well, I reported and I found out that my first job was going to be, I was the head of the juvenile section. How big a section was it? You're looking at him. So I proceeded over there, and then Lucien and I, he had these avenues where it's hard to meet, but there was a lot of times in our lifetimes that we sort of crossed paths. But this was one time that I always remember. When I got over to the juvenile section, I found out that my office wasn't going to be in the DA's office. It was going to be in the juvenile probation office. So I go over there, brand new lawyer, didn't know too much about juvenile cases, except, the Supreme Court case that gave all juveniles the right to due process. But anyway, when I went over there, I met a lady. And she was so helpful because she did more or less all of the legal work. She did the petitions, she did the orders, she did all kinds of things. And she was the first one to get in and help me. And I'm telling you, I needed the help. But I remember she did all of that stuff, and she did it on a Royal Standard typewriter. That's all the county had. But anyway, made a great relationship and talked to this lady. And when I left the juvenile office and I went over to the main courthouse, I told them how great these people were that I had worked with over there. They had a lot of good employees. And that one was right there. She was the one. But you know what? We didn't know that that was going to be the Mrs. Lucien Campbell in a couple of years. Well, anyway, Lucien came back and we were both chief prosecutors. We prosecuted and moved to the district courts. I've heard all of the speakers, and Lucien was really a great lawyer. I mean, an appellate lawyer, and I know he's a good appellate lawyer because he used to represent me on those cases that they got appealed, on those cases we would try up there. But he was always very thorough. And the one thing that I really liked about him, and he and I got along well, is what some of the other gentlemen. Lucien was a great one for preparation. It was always the thing, you better be more prepared than the other guy on the other side. He had a great mind. I mean, he could go, I remember sometimes on those records, he would say, and that was when he was working in the appellate section, he would come up and he would say, you didn't ask for the converse on this self-defense or this and that. And I would say, yeah, you're right, Lucien, I should have. And he said, well, I think it's all right anyway. Well, it was always all right because Lucien won all the time. But anyway, those were great things. And the one thing I really remembered him for was, I think Cindy and that Lucien lived married about 47 years, right? That's right. And I remember one time, it was after, many years. But anyway, I'd left the DA's office. I was in private practice. Lucien was over there with y'all in the federal courthouse. And we would see each other. And again, we would be sort of reminiscing about old times. And one time we went out there, was a couple other lawyers and myself to Lucien's house. And Cindy had made this great meal. I mean, she had chicken salad, she had dessert, she really, and Lucien had a very good bottle of wine. So we sat there and had a few drinks and really reminisced a long time. And all of the stories that all of y'all have told are all true. I mean, you couldn't find a better lawyer than that. But I tell you, he was really a great family man. He loved his family. He talked about heaven. And we would also talk about the law and everything, but more or less it was, the people. And he was very proud of the people that were with him because he took an office that only had, Ed, 4 or 5 lawyers when he started? Three. I used to think he was on the rodeo circuit because he's always talking about going to El Paso or to Midland or one of these places. But he was always very, very proud of his staff and of his people. And that's the one thing I remember about it. I can't think of one person, not a lawyer, not a defense lawyer, not another prosecutor, not a judge, anybody that ever said anything about him. He really, really was a good guy. He had integrity. He was honest. And he just was a good guy. He really was. Anyway, the luncheon that we went, that we got to talking. And I remember as we were getting ready to leave, and Lucien was having some health problems at that time, but his mind was just as sharp and he was just as smart and he was just his personality was just the same. But we walked by his wall and there was a plaque up there. He looked at me and he said, "Did you get one of those too?" And I looked at it and I said, "Yeah, I did, Lucien." And he said, "Well, where is it?" And I said, "Same place you did. I hung it on the wall." And it was a award that they give whenever you become a lawyer of 50 years. And we looked up at that and he said, "It's been a good journey." And I said, "Remember when?" And it really was. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. In the limited time we have left, with regret, traditionally our speakers are limited to one, and Mr. Campbell was blessed to have so many individuals who wanted to share their experiences and their comments and their blessings to both the family and celebrating the memory of Mr. Campbell. With regret, I know I express on behalf of all the members of the court that we were unable to enjoy a better opportunity to really get to experience the same blessings that the members of his colleagues that were here that were able to enjoy. So thank you very much. At this time, if I may invite Ms. Donna McElroy, President of the San Antonio Bar Association.
Chief Justice, may it please the court.
It does. Thank you.
Memorial resolution on the death of Lucien Benton Campbell on behalf of the San Antonio Bar Association. Whereas Lucien Benton Campbell was born November 17th, 1942 in Paris, Texas, and passed away on June 30th, 2020. And whereas Mr. Campbell received his undergraduate degree and his JD from the University of Texas at Austin and then joined the Army. He served 2 years, including time as a judge advocate general in Korea. And whereas following his time in the military, Mr. Campbell started as an assistant criminal district attorney, but ventured into public defense and eventually became known as San Antonio's first federal public defender. The father of the federal public defender's office in San Antonio and received national recognition for his work. He led teams of lawyers in presenting cases to the United States Supreme Court 3 times and won all 3 cases. Whereas Mr. Campbell was a member of the San Antonio Bar Association for more than 15 years and a sustaining life fellow for the San Antonio Bar Foundation. One of Mr. Campbell's proudest accomplishments was the opening of the office for the Western District of Texas, where he helped with over 500 cases between San Antonio and El Paso. By the time Mr. Campbell retired, he was overseeing 46 lawyers in 4 different offices and handled over 6,000 cases each year. Widely known in the legal community, Mr. Campbell was beloved by his friends and colleagues. Whereas Mr. Campbell is survived by his wife, Cynthia, son, Evan, grandchildren, Emmeline and Benton Campbell, brother, William, sisters, Kay Lowack, Kelly Shivers, and Vicki Campbell, and numerous nieces and nephews. Be it resolved that the San Antonio Bar Association and the Texas Fourth Court of Appeals expresses their genuine regret on the death of Lucien Benton Campbell and their sincerest sympathy to his family and to his friends. Be it further resolved that this resolution be appended to the minutes of the San Antonio Bar Association and copies be sent to his family. Be it further resolved that this resolution be placed in the permanent records and minutes of the Texas Fourth Court of Appeals, dated this 9th day of March, 2023.
Thank you. And be it so ordered that the copy of this resolution, along with the transcript of today's proceedings, as well as a copy of the video that was taken today, will be archived in the records of the Fourth Court of Appeals. A courtesy copy is also provided to his family so that they may enjoy it as well. At this time, I'd also like to extend appreciation and gratitude and invite applause for the individuals who assist in these proceedings, namely Kathy Hoffman, a reporting agency who has volunteered her time and services for many years with the court. And today we have Terry Schultz, who's here today as our court reporter, and our own amply named Dell, our IT gentleman, helped set up our videographer. And if I failed to do so, I'll introduce the clerk of court, Mr. Mike Cruz, who's also assisting in this proceedings. Again, thank you very much for the family for allowing the Fourth Court this opportunity to celebrate the life of Mr. Campbell, to enjoy. The court will remain in recess in his honor for the rest of the day. And we invite you to stay here, enjoy each other's company, share more stories. I'm sure Ambassador Brado and Judge Bambrada and others can share many, and we certainly would like to enjoy a few of them. And the members of the court would like to be able to use what limited more time we have with you to be able to come in and say hello and greetings. So again, thank you very much.